in? Yeah, yes. Right.
Yes. Okay, so welcome everybody. A very good evening to all of you. This is Deepthi this side, welcoming you all on behalf of Breakthrough Science Society. Breakthrough Science Society is an all India science organization constituting a group of scientists, research scholars, IT professionals, lecturers, teachers, and students involved in inculcating and promoting scientific outlook and logical faculty of mind to establish a scientific culture in society. We have been actively working in various institutions and localities across the country to popularize science, its advancements, along with effectively communicating science and its correlation to society. Today, we've all gathered here for the All India Convention on the topic Make Knowledge Free, Not Private Property. The topic itself holds its own prime significance. We've had close to 2000 plus registration, and the number today speaks for it. I now invite Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukhopadhyay, the All India President of Breakthrough Science Society, to deliver the presidential address. Over to you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you, Deepthi. First of all, let me welcome Professor Balaram, Professor Lakhotia, and Professor Soumitro Banerjee, the three speakers at this convention, and all the participants who have assembled to hear these deliberations of this convention. First, let me say a few words about the background in which this convention is organized. All this started with a lawsuit filed by three publishers, the Elsevier, the Wiley and American Chemical Society at the Delhi High Court against two web providers, Science Hub, SCI Hub, and LibGen, who for Copyright Infringement Act. I will say a few words later that what role these two organizations are doing, but we thought in the situation prevailing in our country, if these two websites, if they are blocked in our country, then a vast number of our scientific workers, including particularly the research workers, they will not have access to the scientific literature. And it will put a spoke in the research activities going on in this country. Now, we thought, because of this, we thought that we would start a signature campaign requesting the Indian central government not to take steps to block these sites. And we got a tremendous response to this signature campaign. I believe about 13,000 scientists and research workers, they signed the appeal and they requested that a convention be arranged where all these points could be discussed. Now, this scientific publication, it serves a great role in scientific research because the scientists who are doing the research, they approach the journals for two purposes. Firstly, to share their findings with the broader scientific community, and also, secondly, to acquaint themselves with what is happening in the scientific world and to acquaint them with the work of his peers. So, till the World Wide Web and the internet came, when we are young, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, then the usual practice was we will go to a library, pick out the journal, read the paper in which we are interested, and then if we want to have a personal copy of that paper, we'd write to the author for a off print. So, and the things were working finely in them. But there has been a tremendous change since the advent of internet and World Wide Web. Now, two things have happened. One is that there has been an explosive growth in the number of journals. So in our days, there were a handful of journals in my subjects. Now at least there are 100 journals in my branch of geology. So it must be the same with all other disciplines. So this has happened. And secondly, now most of the research material publications, they are accessed online. So, and this publication business has now become a monopoly business, and only a handful of publishers take part in this activity. And so if a worker wants to access a paper online, he has to either his institution will have to subscribe to the journal, and he can go to the institute and look it up in the computer there, or he can access it anywhere, but at a price. And the cost of the subscriptions of the journals, because of this monopoly, it has become astronomically high. Not to speak of most of the universities in our country, in other countries, in the developed countries also, they are finding it more and more difficult to subscribe to all the necessary journals covering all the disciplines in science. So in this situation, it has become a real problem to have free access to scientific literature. In this situation, the two organizations, Science Hub and LibGen, they put a vast number of papers online which can be accessed free by all. So this, under the given situation, this came as a boon to the Indian research workers, and they freely access these sites to access the publications of their interest. So this question now about the lawsuit against Science and Science, SCI Hub and LibGen raises some ethical questions also. That should knowledge be free? That's the question we have put in this convention. Because most of the research that is being done in our country, as well as in most of the developed countries, most of the research is funded by government agencies. In other words, the money comes from the taxpayer. So ethically, the taxpayers should have an access to see what the product of the research is. But now, with the present system of copyright, this cannot be done unless you buy the journal or buy the paper. The author has no copyright. The copyright is held by the journal, by the publishing house. So this condition is creating a break in the free access to knowledge. So this convention will discuss this problem and see what are the mechanisms possible apart from this SCI Hub and LibGen, what mechanisms can be done, what mechanisms can the government or the broader scientific community can take to make the knowledge freely accessible to the scientific workers. So we will listen to the speakers on these issues. They will give their thoughts, and then there will be a question answer session where you can ask your questions and the speakers will answer. Before we begin the program, I would ask Dr. Uma Ramchandran to read out the resolutions to be adopted at this convention. Dr. Ramchandran, please.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to read out today's resolution. Resolution demanding continuation of the services of Sci-Hub and LibGen in India. The pursuit of scientific research involves, on one hand, finding out what is already known to science, and on the other hand, making one's own contribution to the furtherance of scientific knowledge and sharing it with others. Scientific journals publications play a major role in facilitating both these processes. At present, there are two publication models. In the first, the researcher submits the manuscript to the research journal brought out by a publisher like Elsevier, Wiley, ACS, Springer, or World Scientific. The editorial board of the journal, comprising uh, scientists of repute, arrange for the peer review of the submitted paper. If it passes the test, it is published by the journal. Neither the author nor the reviewer are paid by the publisher. Yet, institutional libraries have to pay very large sums of money as subscriptions to these journals, which most universities are finding increasingly difficult to afford. In the second model, called open access, in which anyone has free access to read any work, authors have to pay large sums of money to the publisher to get their papers published. In both cases, the money necessary for the uh, entire exercise comes from the taxpayers. Research is conducted using taxpayers' money. The government has to support the institutional libraries to subscribe to these journals, and if a researcher wants to publish in a open access journal, that money also has to come from the institutional grants. Thus, in the system in place, a few monopolistic publishers get rich at the expense of the Indian taxpayers. Since most institutional libraries cannot afford the high subscription rates of these monopolistic publishers, a majority of researchers in India are deprived of access to the frontiers of knowledge. In this situation, the websites like Sci-Hub and LibGen have been rendering great service by making research papers and related information freely available. This convention requests the Union government to allow continuation of the availability of Sci-Hub and LibGen in India because A, these websites are not using the research papers for any commercial use. B, downloading articles for personal use or for research is permitted by the section 52 of the Indian Copyright Act. And C, if these websites become inaccessible to researchers, Indian science will be plunged into a deep crisis. So this is the resolution on which we shall deliberate.
Thank you, Dr. Ruma. Now I ask Ms. Dipti to introduce the speakers and conduct the rest of the proceedings.
All right. Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. We'll start the next part of the program. So we have three distinguished speakers with us today, Professor Balaram, Professor Lakhotia, and Professor Banerjee. Each of them would present their views, and then we'll have the Q&A started later on. So our first speaker today is Professor Balaram. Here's a quick introduction of Professor Balaram. Professor Padmanabhan Balaram is an Indian biochemist and a former director of Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, India. His research interests are in bioorganic chemistry and molecular biophysics. He is the author of more than 400 research papers. Professor Balaram is a fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Science Academy, and the World Academy of Sciences, Trieste, Italy. He was the editor of the journal Current Science from 1995 till 2013. The editorial pieces written by him every fortnight over this long period became a hallmark of scholarly writing. He has received many awards and honors in recognition of his work, of which mention must be made of the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize of CSIR, Alumni Award for Excellence in Research from IISc, TUAS Award in Chemistry, G.D. Birla Award for Scientific Research, Distinguished Alumnus Award of IIT Kanpur, and notably Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan by the Government of India. I now request Professor Balaram to present.
Thank you very much. I'd like to share my screen.
Sure.
Yes, you can share now. It's enabled.
Are you able to see it?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yes, you can make it full screen.
Yeah,
It's fine now.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I'd like to thank the organizers and Professor Banerjee for inviting me. The subject of this convention, you're really debating the proposition, make knowledge free, not private property. Now, I would paraphrase this to ask, can or should science journals be freely accessed? The answer is in principle, yes. In practice, no. And free access may never be possible because, as the Americans have this old saying, that there is no such thing as a free lunch. There are many things in life which should be freely available, water, power, and so on, access to the internet. None of these are freely available. A cost has to be paid. The question really is, can access to journals be available at a reasonable cost? The catalyst for today's discussion is really the case in the Delhi High Court. Now, this is an immediate problem. And I think the resolution that has just been read out provides a temporary solution. But we must think beyond this case because there is no guarantee, because of the financial models that they may use, that Sci-Hep and LibGen will be available at all times in the future. So the immediate problem now presents us with an opportunity. It presents us with an opportunity to really understand the origin of the crisis in academic public. See, history is sometimes very important in understanding the present. Now, I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to speak to the Library and Information Society in India. And I spoke to them on the topic of science publishing. And I subtitled it as Greed, Vanity, and the Decline of Scholarship. And I'd like to really tell you what I meant. Greed, I referred to the publishers. Vanity is, of course, from academicians, scientists primarily. And the decline of scholarship is really, again, due to a metrics-obsessed ecosystem, which uses many quantitative metric citation measures, which I won't talk about here. And this has caused a major decline in academic scholarship. But this is not a new problem. The crisis in science publishing has been building from the late 1990s. The introduction of the author pays open access journals under the Public Library of Science, PLOS banner, by prominent American scientists may have done more harm than good to science publishing. What many people have forgotten is that the open access movement originally started with what was called green open access, with Stephen Harnard arguing for institutional repositories in which the pre-publication copy of the paper was deposited and anybody could access it. Because of the growth of the internet, this was in principle possible. Unfortunately, institutions did not set up repositories, and the searching of these repositories by search engines like Google was not very easy. Instead, what happened was the author-pays open access journals came under the PLOS banner. This happened as early as 2002, and we are now discussing the problem 18 years later. Today, we have hybrid journals in which some papers are open access and some papers are not open access, and these are simply what I would call a publishing scam. But why do we need so many journals? This is because I can paraphrase Carroll, who said that the proper definition of a man is an animal that writes letters. Scientists are animals who like to write papers. And so journals have grown. Here's just a list of journals beginning from 1665 all the way up to 1893. So everything in the 19th century. Here I show you a journal, the Journal of the American Chemical Society, which was first published in 1879 by the American Chemical Society. These journals have contributed greatly to the growth of academic science over the past century. Today, it's ironic that the American Chemical Society stands with Elsevier and Wiley in a case in the Delhi High Court to shut down access to scientific publication. Now let's look at Elsevier. In 2010, Elsevier's publishing arm reported profits of £724 million on just over £2 billion in revenue. This is a 36% margin, higher than what Apple, Google, or Amazon posted that year. So science publishing is an extremely important business proposition for these companies. Now, the cartoon on the left summarizes this. I heard the word ethics right in the introduction. Ethics and business are often at cross purposes. Ethics is a word which is easily used in public discourse, but we must be practical. Now, of course, the cartoon says, it turns out the public hates the culture of corporate greed. And then, of course, the chairman says, let's figure out how we can monetize that hate. What the publishing industry has done is, since paid access, they decided they would go to open access. But even in open access, you have to pay, because you now have to pay to publish. And now what has happened is we have mainstream journals which pay and publish models, and predatory journals which work exclusively on a pay and publish model. The predatory journals have done more damage to the image of science in India than almost anything else. So these have all been hijacked, the open access movement, to maximize corporate revenues. In 2011, in an article in The Guardian, George Monbiot, who wrote a previous article some years earlier, asked a question: who are the most ruthless capitalists in the Western world, whose monopolistic practices make Walmart look like a corner shop and Rupert Murdock look like a socialist? Rupert Murdock is the man who today owns a lot of what one would call newspapers and other tabloids and also television stations. But at one point, Rupert Murdock also owned Macmillan, and Macmillans were the publishers of Nature. But scientists did not really worry about this. And he says, you won't guess the answer in a month of Sundays. While there are plenty of candidates, he says, my vote goes to academic publishers. And he says the racket they run is most urgently in need of referral to the competition authorities. This is an article in an English newspaper in 2011, 10 years ago. So it is important for even in India, for the government to recognize that the the science publishing industry is in urgent need of regulation, just like the pharmaceutical industry. This, of course, you know how much it costs to get a single article by paying. But look at subscription prices. He says that the most expensive I've seen is Elsevier's Biochemica Biophysica Acta at $20,930 a year. This is amazing, because in the years that I was director of the Indian Institute of Science, I battled library budgets. And it is possible to battle library budgets by battling publishers and their prices. So it is important to remember that this is not a new problem. What has happened is Sci-Hub and LibGen have provided you access, but none of you know what Sci-Hub and LibGen are. You don't know who runs them, you don't know what their business model is, you don't know whether they will survive after 2 or 3 years. You have no idea. The returns on publishing is astronomical. And now it turns out, and this is again several years ago, 10 years ago, Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley published 42% of the journal articles. The interesting thing in the Delhi High Court case is that Springer has not joined its competitors. Springer now publishes the Nature group of journals. A Deutsche Bank analysis, which is referred to in this article, says that the publisher adds relatively little value to the publishing process. If the process really were as complex, then the 40% margins would not be available. Because in a business, finally, the margins that you get depend on how much you have to spend for your product and how much you earn from your product. But what I want to show you is so that the students who are listening don't think that this is a job only for the government to do. It is also important for you to understand the origins of the problem. And he says, perhaps it's not surprising that one of the biggest crooks ever to have preyed upon the people of this country, he means the United Kingdom, was Robert Maxwell, made much of his money through academic publishing. And I will show you who Maxwell is. And this is a ruthless industry. Maxwell, there are interesting articles to which I've put up references here, so you can go and read them for yourself, because this might be available on YouTube, the slides afterwards. He's a man who has a very interesting career. There's a book about him, and it's well worth reading. From a refugee, he became a media mogul. He amassed private jets, helicopters, etc. He was a man who preceded Donald Trump in the way he used a business. The way he built journals was that he took the most important scientists, and he did this in the late 1950s, to conferences at the most picturesque places in France and Switzerland. He brought up castles in the United Kingdom, and he would entertain guests at all these parties. And who were these guests? They were Nobel laureates, they were prospective Nobel laureates, they were important people. And through them, he got them all on their editorial boards, and through them, he began to make science journals. He bought up a publishing house called Pergamon Press, and Pergamon Press, I will show you, was brought up by him for a few £1,000, and it was sold to Elsevier in 1991 for £440 million. One of the first journals that he published was the journal Tetrahedron, which was a journal in organic chemistry. Maxwell, by interacting with scientists, quickly realized that you can prey on the vanities of science. If you treat them like kings, they will do whatever you ask them. So very quickly, he decided that science publishing is a perpetual financing machine. This is a direct quote. He then began to introduce letters journals, and Tetrahedron Letters was the first one. I don't know in which field you are, or those of you who are listening, but if you're in chemistry, you will realize that the Royal Society of Chemistry introduced chemical communications, Physical Society had physical review letters, so letters journals simply multiplied. The importance of the publisher is seen from the article that I show you at the bottom of the slide. This is a 1983 article written by Carl Djerassi, and Djerassi was one of the most important chemists of the 20th century. He's the man who did the research leading to the oral contraceptive pill, and he was a major researcher in the area of steroids. And look at the dedication. It's dedicated to Robert Maxwell, founder and publisher of Pergamon Press, on the occasion of his 60th birthday. So we'll come to Sci-Hub. How do these articles, especially Monbio in 2018, view Alexandra El-Bakian? He describes this. It's a pirate web scraper service, has done more than any government to tackle one of the biggest rip-offs of the modern era, the capture of publicly funded research that should belong to us all. Everyone should be free to learn. Knowledge should be disseminated as widely as possible. No one would publicly disagree with these sentiments. That is the problem with conventions of this kind. Nobody will disagree with you. Yet, governments and universities have allowed the big academic publishers to deny these rights. You have to ask the question, why are all the institutions in India negotiating such ridiculous prices with these publishing houses? They've already done this. Many of these are consortia, UGC, MHRD consortia, DST consortia, DBT consortia, all of them, CSIR consortia, all of them paying money to Elsevier, Wiley, and the American Chemical Society. This is greed. What about vanity? Snow White, of course, you look at a mirror and ask who's the fairest of them all. And then, of course, one day Snow White will say something else, and that's the mirror will say something else, and that's the origin of the story. Look at the journal Cell. It began in 1974. It became Cell Press in 1986. It was acquired by Elsevier in 1999. When I first began to write against academic publishers in 2003, there wasn't anybody who listened. And Levin, who built this up, was a scientist. Maxwell recognized one kind of vanity in scientists. Levin was clever. He realized scientists are very vain and wanted to be part of the selective members club. Cell was it. And you had to get your papers in there. Randy Sheckman, who has now started, a Nobel laureate, who's now started another journal which takes money for publishing, eLife, said, I was subject to this kind of pressure too. And he ended up publishing much of his famous work in Cell. But Cell had a different model. What Benjamin Levin did was he told authors not to publish small papers, they have to publish big papers, what he called the complete story. And he recruited the leading molecular biologists of the day as authors. This is what all the publishers have done. How do you drive up the impact factor or the general public impact in the perception of scientists in the journal? You get the best scientists in the world to publish in it. And the West has all these scientists. So once you see this, you also want to publish in the same journal. So as far as science publishing is concerned, Maxwell introduced the concept of the least publishable unit by introducing tetrahedron letters in the 60s. And the deluge of data in the complete story was what Benjamin Levin introduced in the 1980s and beyond. Who produces journals? Publishers, editors, and authors. The question we should ask is who should pay for journals to survive? If it's readers, you have to have paid access. This is through libraries and institutional budgets. If it is authors, it must be through open access and research grants. But the open access model and the paid access model cannot easily coexist because they can be subverted, and they have been subverted by the commercial publishers. The question you have to ask really is, how much profit should the commercial publisher make? You can't do away now with commercial publishers. That is wishing for an ideal world which is not going to happen. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. Publishers exploit human weakness and the vanity of science. What about the vanity of scientists? There is the metrics obsession. It's not only scientists, it's governments, it's funding agencies, it is those who regulate science, like the University Grants Commission. Look at this paper which has appeared in PLOS Biology in 2020. It's called Updated Science-Wide Author Databases of Standardized Citation Indicators. I've taken just one formula from this paper to tell you how ridiculous even such an approach can be. This is for formula for calculating the career-long impact of a scientist C subscript I. Can this be done? Now they've put up a list of, say, a couple of thousand Indian scientists and divided fields in some arbitrary manner, which they have. And now you will find in India that vanity is being exploited. You get any number of emails from scientists who say that they are now on that list, and so they have done very important work. If they've done very important work, it would be anyway known. It doesn't have to be known by a formula of this kind. But this tells you that science and scientists, it's a very complicated problem. Scientists must also look inwards sometimes. The tyranny of metrics is that this is used in the measurement of academic quality. You need a paper to publish, to get a PhD thesis. Because of this, predatory journals have grown, and Professor Lakhotia, I'm sure, might even mention this. What has happened is that objective metrics, and I put it in quotes, have replaced subjective local judgments because nobody believes anybody else. Awards and rewards committees rely excessively on impact factors and citation metrics. Even for a student to get a postdoctoral fellowship depends on his papers and the impact of the journals in which he or she has published the paper. The result of this, everyone in science, from the early PhD students to the oldest scientists, are all now interested in publications and in the impact factors of the journals that they publish. This, of course, then permits publishers to exploit this weakness. I have said more or less what I wanted to say, and I also have a list of questions which I will take up, which have been provided by Professor Banerjee, but I will take that up in the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Balaram. That was quite an insightful walkthrough of science publications and journals from the time you started. So thank you very much. So now we move on to the next speaker, Professor Lakhotia. Here's a brief introduction of Professor S.C. Lakhotia. Professor Subhash Chandra Lakhotia is a cytogeneticist, an outstanding academician. He is known for his pioneering researches in Drosophila with regard to its chromosome organization and replication. A Raja Ramanna Fellow of the Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Atomic Energy, he is an elected fellow of all three major Indian science academies: Indian National Science Academy, Indian Academy of Sciences, and National Academy of Sciences, India. He was a recipient of the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize awarded by the CSIR. He has served the editorial boards of Current Science, Journal of Bioscience, RNA Biology, Cell Stress and Chaperones, and Annals of Neurosciences. At present, he is an INSA senior scientist at Benaras Hindu University. I now request Professor Lakhotia to present.
Okay, thanks, Dipti, and thanks the organizers for asking me to talk on this very important issue. Professor Balaram has already made out the main points that why we are in this crisis, and in his characteristic style, he has analyzed the points, and I think that's exactly the point where we have come to today. Historically, as was mentioned by Professor Mukherjee earlier, that in good old days when we didn't have internet, we also had problem of access of journals, and then we had, I mean, my generation at least remembers, and I'm sure some of the audience who were working in 1970s, 80s, or 90s would still remember that we used to reprint request cards printed, on which we go to library, find out a new journal which has come out, and where an article may be of interest, and we would write to them, to the author's address by post, and maybe the reprint, hard copy reprint will come in 3 months' time, 5-6 months' time, 1 year time, depending upon how it goes and how the letter comes back. But then we did have that problem. And then over the years, one thought that as the internet gets more and more accessible and is widely used today, the access to the literature should be much more free. Unfortunately, it has just become the reverse now. And I think partly, as Prof. Balaram said, the academicians also have to take a major share in this in two parts. One is that we allow these commercial publishers to take care to hijack the copyright laws as they wanted. Because, for example, one particular thing that earlier, when you would write a book, edit a book, or the publisher will give you not only free copies of the books, but will also give you royalty over years as the book was sold. Today, the editors, the authors don't get anything. They don't even get a hard copy of the book. Forget the royalty. Now this has happened because they have taken all the academicians for a ride. And as Professor Balaram said, our vanity is okay. I wrote a book for this big publisher. I edited a book for this publisher, and the impact factor and so on. And consequently, we have lost completely control. We have become absolute slaves of publishers. Even when we want to publish our papers, we always have to think in the back of mind the impact factor, the citation index, and all that factor. One is no more doing research for the sake of pleasure of research, but to publish, and to publish in a certain journal of certain rank and certain credit, so that your academic performance index factor goes up, and so on and so forth. Now, with that kind of a situation, we are where we are today. The solutions are all right. Sci-Hub and these are doing a service which is important, but I think, as Professor Balaram said, that cannot be a permanent solution. We need to find a permanent solution. And I would like to bring to notice of all the people concerned that the science academies in 2019 had organized massive brainstorming about open access, how to do it. And I'm glad that Professor Ashok Singhi is also in the audience, because he was one who catalyzed this whole process, that how should we bring out the open access situation for every Indian researcher, academician, and so on and so forth. And then after this, we published our recommendations in Current Science last year in April 10 issue as to what we should be able to do on this. And I think the major recommendations that were there, if they are followed, then there is a chance that yes, we can come back to a situation where the enormous taxpayers' money that the resolution states, which is going out to fatten the commercial publishers, will be much better utilized. We are already spending several hundred crores of millions of dollars in subscriptions, multiple subscriptions for the same journal and so on. So one of the solution or suggestion that was made by the science academies was that there should be one nation, one subscription. And I'm glad at least in the background of the new science education, the science and technology policy that is being draft is available, at least talks of this, that yes, the government will try to have one subscription for every journal, so that every Indian, no matter where is, whether they are in academic or non-academic fields, can have free access to all the published paper. And I think that should happen because, as has been stated in the resolution, and as we all know, that the researchers do all the hard work, editors do the hard work, reviewers do the hard work, and all of them pay for publishing. We pay for reading, we pay for publishing. Now, this is obviously ridiculous. It's unethical, but because the copyright laws have been modified in such a manner that all the authors, I think, have never read the copyright. They simply sign on dotted lines because they want to publish a paper. I think we need to read that, and we need to have a movement whereby these copyright laws are more author-friendly than that we give away completely copyright to the publisher, so that we have no right on what we discover, what we talk about, because it should be our intellectual property, but we give away that right, and I think that needs to be taken care of. So one of the things I think that if the new policy that is suggested should really be put in practice, that instead of multiple subscription by multiple libraries and universities and UGC and DS institutes and DBT institutes, CSR institutes, and so on, each one is subscribing in a consortium mode, and they are subscribed to the same publisher. That should be brought into one common, that is one possible way. The other possibility is where we buy, and I'm sure the whole world is rising to this. India should also make use of it. The preprint archives, which have started, although we should be careful about predatory preprint archives also, which are charging money. The standard preprint archives that have been maintained in physics and biology also, it started about 10 years ago. Bioarchives from Coaching Harvard, they don't charge any money. You simply put your initial manuscript on the preprint server. You can revise it as many times as you want it. And 99% journals accept preprints already put on the archives in their journal. They can be considered. And once the paper is published, the preprint archives put that link with that published journal so that your paper is easily accessible by everyone. And that is something we would want that India also has. The funding agencies, they did start the repositories, but unfortunately, none of them function effectively, so that the PIs could not place their papers on the archives, and they remain only in principle that yes, we have repositories. And I think we need to make that practice much more. But a more important question is, how do we access the paper that are published in journals that are behind paywalls? That you either pay author pay charges, or you pay the author pays open access charges, or the reader need to pay per paper charges. I think something that we have completely forgotten, and unfortunately publishers have given all the scientists a wrong impression that you cannot share your published work as PDF files. It's completely wrong. No copyright anywhere can prevent you from sharing your work, your PDF that you get from the publisher, and each author is entitled to get a complete PDF of the final published paper. This is part of the copyright again. And this PDF can be shared with anybody as long as you are not selling it, you are not driving any copyright. So what I do myself, for example, many journals which are not accessible, I can't read a paper, I simply send an email request to the author. Email addresses of almost all authors are now available. Every author everywhere in the world is now internet connected, and therefore simply send an email with a request to send you a PDF. Unfortunately, some authors, for example, I had this experience that I wrote to somebody to send, and the author responded back, sorry, because of copyright, I cannot share the PDF. I have to write back that this is wrong. You can always share your PDF file with any number of scientists, any number of academicians who want to use it for academic purpose. And then I got the PDF file. And I think more and more of us should follow that. Yes, but then it is also true that till we get to that situation where we have this limited access, and most libraries cannot afford all the journals, because we have limited money and the costs are going up, we need to have sources of access. And that I agree, that Sci-Hub and these agencies, maybe legally they are not correct, but ethically they are doing something that the community needs to be accessible. And I think we need to have that kind of situation, that the government must plan things in a way so that every interested person get access. And I think we are not spending much less on the access, but then we are spending it indiscreetly multiple times. For example, even for subscription to like databases, Science Citation Index, for example, or the Scopus Index. There are multiple subscriptions happening in the country. Why should every institution or every class of institution have subscribe to that? That could be one common subscription, and data could be made available to anyone so that we can make better use of the limited money that we have available. And once we do that, I'm sure access will be much more and more common, and which of course is a fundamental right that each one of us has, that we should have access to anything that is published, anything that is available. But then, as Balaram said, somebody has to pay for it. Now, what we would want is that government and the public agencies should take care of that cost so that citizens get this knowledge access, so that our young researchers do not have to suffer, that they do not know what is happening elsewhere in the world. But in the meanwhile, please keep on your work, keep on your effort, and also keep on using the email system to request the PDF files. And I'm sure if we make it more and more on the social media, also this idea that yes, PDF can be shared easily, it will take up, it will be as vibrant as it used to be in our good old days when we had hard copy reprints to request from authors. And of course, in those days, we had something interesting. We used to get beautiful stamps on the cover, which would make a good collection. Now, today, you can't get a stamp on the internet, but at least you can get the paper. And I think that we should do. I'll stop here and wait for more questions to answer. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lakhotia. That was quite an insightful thought from your side. I think, I mean, there's a lot of accountability from various people actually involved in this process. And yeah, we'll certainly take questions from people. So I request the audience to post their questions in the chat box. So during the Q&A session, we'll have them being addressed. So I now move on to the third speaker, who's Professor Soumitro Banerjee. So Professor Soumitro Banerjee is a professor of physical sciences and the Dean of Academic Affairs at IISER, Kolkata. Before moving to IISER, he taught in the Electrical Engineering Department of IIT Kharagpur for 23 years. He's known for his work on nonlinear dynamics and bifurcation theory. He received the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2003. He is a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Academy of Engineering, Indian National Science Academy, the World Academy of Sciences, and Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. He has been in the forefront of the effort to create a science movement in the country and is the General Secretary of the Breakthrough Science Society. I now request Professor Banerjee to address.
Thank you, Deepti. And my sincere thanks to Professor Balaram and Professor Lakhotia for giving such insightful perspective of a very serious problem that academia is facing today. Actually, knowledge progresses by taking into account the knowledge created by the earlier generation. So each generation builds on the knowledge created by the earlier generation, and unless the knowledge is accessible to the new generation, in general, knowledge cannot progress. Science cannot progress. And moreover, the method of science is such that I may have a hypothesis, but then it is not only me who would test the hypothesis. It is an enterprise spanning the whole globe. Hundreds of scientists will do hundreds of different tests, and finally, through that, a new understanding would emerge. And for this enterprise to succeed, it is vitally important that there be a free communication, free exchange of information between scientists, both scientists of the earlier generation as well as the scientists of today's generation. So the problem is, this is something that is vitally important for the advancement of science. But unfortunately, we live in a society where anything can be commoditized. Commodity means something that can be bought and sold. And now we have a situation where knowledge can be bought and sold. It has been commoditized. This was not quite so, as Professor Balaram showed, that even 50 years back, it was not quite so. This is a very peculiar development that has happened in the scientific arena for the last, say, 50 years, in which publication, something that's a lifeline of science, I do my research and I have to make that result known to the rest of the community. How do I do that? The only way to do that is to publish. And how do I know what others are doing, what results others have got, so that I do not repeat the same mistakes? Is by reading others' papers. This is an elementary thing. Now that has been completely sort of taken over by a few monopolistic publishers, huge publication houses, so that, as Professor Balaram showed, that they control about 60% of all publications today. And because of that, now we have a situation where it is not only a paywall before individual researchers trying to access the information available on the net. It is a wall. It's a concrete wall standing in the way of science. Unless we get the information regarding what others are doing, we cannot do our research. And these publishers are now standing in our way. But then what do? We cannot survive without publishing. Science survives by making our work known to others, and publication is the way to do that. So presently we have a system which is now termed as an oligopoly, where a few publication houses together control not only the publication, not only the product, they control knowledge. And this is dangerous. They control what is to be upmarket. They control what is not to be considered upmarket. They control who will be known, as my previous speakers have said. It is also driven by the vanity of scientists. So they also drive vanity, and through that, who will be known, who will not be known, even though they might do good work, all these are now controlled by a few monopolistic publication houses. It has been said, I'll not repeat, they do not pay anything to the people who create that knowledge. They do not pay anything to the people who review those submissions. And yet they charge exorbitant prices to sell the knowledge that has been created by somebody else. They're just intermediary, but they charge huge amount of money. They make huge amount of profits. This is what is known as crony capitalism. Unfortunately, out of various sectors of the economy, science has become a victim of such crony capitalism. The question now is that we are scientists, we do science, we ask questions and look for the solutions to those questions. And naturally, it is now necessary for us to devise a way to bring science out of the iron grip of these few monopolistic houses. The initiative that has been taken by this lady, Elvakian, this is one such, but we really do not know. Presently, the struggle is a court struggle in which we have to participate, we have to argue, we have to allow these two websites to survive in India so that our students can still continue to have access to that. But then we also need to create a different publication model so that a publication model that is controlled, created, and controlled by the scientific community, not somebody else, not somebody outside the scientific community, and not for profit. And this is a publication model that is in urgent necessity today. How do we do that? We have to have more focused discussion on that. As Professor Lakhotia has pointed out, the archive model is one such, where people can submit their papers and it becomes freely available. There's no charge of submitting the papers. There's no charge of downloading the papers, but there is no reviewing either. It is basically a free market thing. Yes, we can also do that. But point is that there has to be a focused discussion. And as it has been pointed out, such attempts so far has not in the long run succeeded, at least in India, because the participation of the leading scientists in such effort, in organizing such efforts, has been relatively small. And we need to change that. We need to participate in that process. And I think the academies can play a big role in changing the whole publication model. Presently, the situation is that we have a system called copyrights and intellectual property rights, by which those who create that intellectual property, in the long run, they are deprived of that intellectual property rights. So we have a situation where somebody can buy my intellectual property rights without paying me a single paisa. Now, this is a very peculiar situation. The system, the rules, regulations allow that. The rules and regulations allow that somebody with a bag of money can deprive me of my intellectual property right, and scientists, because there is no other way, willingly sign that copyright agreement, because there is no other way. So one thing is to create a different publication model. The other is to question the copyright, the whole concept of copyright itself, because knowledge should be free. The concept of copyright is not to make more knowledge free. And therefore, we need to question the whole concept of copyright, because scientists by themselves, they really want to make knowledge free. The knowledge they create, they want to make it free, make it freely available to others. It is not that they want the copyright. So therefore, we also, I think, need to question at some stage the copyright mechanism, the idea of copyright itself, because that is standing in the way of the progress of science. Finally, I would say that there are things that are legal and there are things that are ethical. And these two might not always be the same. What is ethical might not be legal, and what is legal might not be ethical. In such situations where the progress of science, progress of society demands us to do something, that is our ethics. Our ethics demands that we do something, and if that at some point of time is illegal, then doing something illegal becomes a necessity for the progress of society. Just notice, before the independence, the freedom fighters, the leaders of the freedom movement gave the call of mass law violation movement. What is that? Where the law is immoral, then the violation of the law becomes moral. Now we are facing a situation where these companies are perfectly lawful. They are doing something that is within the laws, but that is immoral and unethical. So in that situation, doing something that is ethical but may not be legal becomes justified. And in that sense, I would say that the illegal step that these two websites have taken to source the papers from various sources and ultimately make it freely available to everybody who seeks that knowledge is an ethical step, and I would welcome that. But as Professor Balaram pointed out, that it's not certain how long will these websites will survive, and therefore, in order for science to survive, we really have to produce a different, a new, a free, a non-profit publication model. And that is the necessity right now. I'll stop now, and if there are questions, then we can take it up as time progresses. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Banerjee, on your insightful perspectives. And I request all the audience to post their questions on. We already have a couple of questions lined up there. And I now request Professor Manavendra Vera, who's part of the All India Secretariat body, to conduct this Q&A session. Over to you, Dr. Manavendra.
Thank you, Deepti. So we have received quite a few questions from the audience. So they kind of have different context to address and so on. So let me start with a question coming from Dr. K. Parichay from Hyderabad. He says that some of the scientific or some scientists are actually saying that we should stop reviewing the papers or the manuscripts coming from these big publishing houses. So what should we do? As part of the scientific community, shall we boycott reviewing these manuscripts? So this question is actually going to Professor Balaram.
I don't think a boycott by Indian reviewers would make any impact on the international publishing monopolies. You can if you want, but it's not going to make any difference to you.
Okay.
Boycotts have been tried by prominent academics from Berkeley and so on, and they have never worked.
Okay, okay. The next question from Dr. K. Parichay, going to Professor Lakhotia, says that what are the possibilities of our science academies to introduce high quality journals so that we can counter these big publishing houses? Yeah. So, yes, Professor Lakhotia, maybe you have to unmute yourself. So this question goes to you.
Yeah, the science academies have to quality journals that they are publishing, but the problem is twofold. One, as I wrote in one of the editorials of the Current Science, that the enemy for Indian journals is us only. Our establishment, as Balaram pointed out, that we have metric system where everything is counted in some numbers. The journals do not fit in, and because they do not fit in, our senior academicians and established scientists do not publish in them, and therefore they're looked down upon. The young people or the other people who publish in these journals, that is something, a mindset that we need to really change. I know it's very difficult. Science academies have made an effort in this, in issuing guidelines about how to assess, and there one of the major points in that guideline is ask what is published, not where it is published. And therefore, science academies should be able to bring out good journals. But a problem again, which has happened, and I particularly feel very sad about it, that science academy journals are also now being managed largely by commercial publishers. And I think this has been a wrong. I compliment Professor Balaram that he registered the Current Science being also taken over by commercial publishers, but most of the science academy journals have been taken over by commercial publishers. And that's where one of the proposals that the science academy and the paper that I mentioned earlier, published in Current Science 2019, was that the government should really support science academies to bring out quality journals with all of updated facilities and appropriate staff, so that these academies can really bring out quality journals. And I should end this particular answer. I think as C.V. Raman, when he started Current Science, I mean, he was involved in it setting up, his conviction was that unless India has good journals of its own, its science will not progress. And we see that. We don't have any international journal of high repute being published from the country. Unfortunately, our own community doesn't believe in the journal that we have. Why should we ask others to publish in them? Unless we start publishing in these journals, good quality papers, it's reputation. I'm not talking about impact factor. I don't care for impact factor. But the reputation that, okay, you want to publish your paper because this will be read by others. In today's time, internet time, there is no bar. At least I know I've been publishing half my research in journals published in India, and my citation, I have no complaint about that paper that I published in Indian journal didn't get cited, and the one that I published outside India got cited. No, it's more or less equal. And therefore, my appeal to all people is, unless you contribute good papers to these journals, they will not improve. And science academies must take a lead in this. Academicians, fellows must take a lead in this. Yes, that's true.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I go to the next question coming from VP Nandakumar. He says that it is true we cannot do without the science journals. Is it possible to escape the clutches of these publishing monopolies if scientists get together and come up with an alternative model of publishing which is affordable and accessible? Actually, that probably goes in continuation with the discussion Professor Lakhotia started. So can you please add also a little more on that, Professor Lakhotia?
Well, I think the question is not the scientists should come out and publish. There are publishers already available, journals are already available. It's only the scientists that they need to get away with what Professor Balaram very correctly stated, vanity. That I publish in a journal of impact factor 20 or 10 or 5. I mean, I know cases where people have counted impact factor 5.45 is 5.43. Now, we need to get out of this. And as long as good science is concerned, it will be seen, it will be visible. And I think that's what we need to do, that forget about impact factor. I should remind the audience again of two things that has happened. There was a DORA declaration 2012 that we do not care about impact factor. Journals were advised not to publish impact factor on their covers and so on and so forth. That was the San Francisco declaration. And then there was another, again, started in America, that you take a place that you will publish preferably in journals published by academies, by universities and academic institutions rather by commercial publishers. But the problem, as I said before, was that we academicians have given away their right to commercial publishers. Academic journals are being maintained by commercial publishers, and therefore we have lost our say. And I think we need to revert back. Academy and the society should have their own journals managed by them. They should get good funding from government and other public money so that they can maintain. That's the only solution that I can think of.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So now I will pick up another question coming from Mr. Vivek Singh. He says that one nation, one subscription looks a very ambitious thing. Does any other country in the world has this model in operation? Further, should the subscription be not limited to people in academia, or it should be open to everyone, like a common people also? So rather than for all, thereby saving the costs. So he wanted to say from this question that does this should be limited to the people in academia or to everyone by this one nation, one subscription? So
well,
this question.
I think one of the things is, as I understand, Brazil has this model. That's what we thought, but now there is a possibility, and the idea is that it should not be limited to, because again, then how do you define your academic or you are not academic? It should be available within the geographical boundaries of India. Anybody from anywhere wants to read something, wants to know something, it should be accessible. Then only it becomes sensible. And I think it should be feasible with a country of this size and the huge money that we are already spending on subscription. Meaninglessly multiple subscriptions for same thing. Different consortia are doing it. I think it can be managed, it can be done. If we have the will, we can do it.
May I say something on this issue?
Yes, Professor Banerjee.
Point is that, yes, one country, one subscription model can definitely make quite a good clutch of journals available to Indian scientists. And in that sense, that can be welcomed. But I would like to point out that that does not satisfy our elementary statement that knowledge should be free. It is only to a particular geographical region. You are paying those publishers in order to make those papers accessible. So conceptually, you are still helping out those oligopolies of publishers. A. Second is that right now in the system that is in place, for example, in our institute, the library has a certain budget, and we are told that you have to pick journals from within that budget. As a result, the faculty members of different departments argue with each other, fight with each other. They ultimately, somebody is satisfied, somebody is not satisfied. We cannot subscribe to all the journals. Now, yes, if you pull together the resources of the whole country, maybe we'll be able to subscribe to more number of journals. But as Professor Balaram has pointed out, that the number of journals has been growing exponentially. And one characteristic of the exponential curve is that it does not saturate. Whatever amount you spend, there will be journals that you cannot subscribe. Which journals will those be? Whose choices will be honored? Ultimately, I am afraid some years down the line, initially it might satisfy our requirements, but some years down the line, we will exactly find the same situation that we find inside each institute. This amount of money is available. Now you scientific community tell me which ones you want to buy. So effectively, it will again boil down to the same thing. That's my fear. I would not upfront oppose this one country, one subscription policy, but these are the pointers. I have some fear that it might work out the way we think it would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Banerjee. Actually, there is another question in this line to add, that would it be even this one nation, one subscription policy, would it be even acceptable to these big publishing houses, do you think?
That may be.
Do you think they will allow even to do that?
Depending on how much money you're willing to cough up, they may.
Yeah. Maybe I should
yes, please.
give you an answer to this.
Please, Professor Balaram.
If you are going to negotiate with these publishers, you have to be a tough negotiator. You have to go to the brink where we will get no journals at all from that publisher. But India is a very large market, and therefore they will eventually they will negotiate with you. But who will do that negotiation? This is not going to happen very easily in government, because government will not understand what to say. So but the one nation, one subscription is again an in-principle thing. All countries could do it. I think there's an article in Wire, maybe in October of this year, of 2020, in which they report that Egypt and Uruguay have this kind of model, but they're very small compared to the kind of requirement.
Okay, thank you. So the next question comes from Mr. Owen Banerjee. He asks, what can be objective policy towards reducing the obsession for impact factor that our institutional hiring procedures, funding agencies, awards and recognitions of scientists, etc. is plagued with? So this question goes to Professor Lakhotia.
Well, I think this is a very difficult, we need to change our mindset. And mindset particularly, I've been suggesting this to almost everyone. My generation, senior people who are there, they need to change their mindset that impact factor is not the only measure to quantify a scientist or a researcher's academic acclaim. And also to the young people that they should have the courage to tell people, their senior people whom they are facing for interview or something, that look at my science, look at what I found out, not where it is published. You see, it's a two-way. It's a very difficult situation. Unfortunately, I must say that in the academy, that the guidelines that were made, I was one of the main involved architects of that. Those guidelines assess the performance of an individual and institution. But the tragedy is that our own academic fellows who are sitting in the academy, selecting fellows, selecting awardees, and so on, do not really agree to this, do not really practice this. They may agree to this, but they don't practice it, because to assess somebody qualitatively, you need some time to read, to find out. And therefore, the suggestion was made, okay, don't look at 100 or 400 papers for somebody. Just look at 5, 10 papers which the person claims or the nominator claims are the ones which are important. And that effort we need to do it to justify our being member of those selection committees and member of those award committees and so on. And I think it's a two-way process. That on one hand, people who are affected must protest, must bring law. What I do, to publish that journal for my career. They also need to take that courage. That look, my science, my research is equally good, and I should be competing with. And the people who are sitting on the judgment chair need to be much more wide thinking, wider perspective, not just impact that becomes a simple arithmetic and therefore do it. No, that will not ever bring the change. The change has been brought out by very careful analysis of the situation and following certain principles. Maybe Professor Balaram may have something to say more on this.
Yes, Professor Balaram, you have more thing to add here, because this is very important issue for young researchers like us.
I don't think it's ever going to happen.
So
that's the short answer to a complex question.
May I give a long answer?
yes, Professor Banerjee.
Well, I think the model, the publication model that is right now in place, with that publication model, Professor Balaram is perfectly right. Things are measured in numbers in terms of impact factors and things like that. And people have now learned how to game the system. But if we move to the archive model that was referred to here, which is in place in physics, and now I learned that it's also in place in biology. Those students who might not know about it, let me tell you that it's not a journal, it's just a repository where you simply deposit your paper, your manuscript, and it will be given a number with which anybody can search it, get it, and people will read it. And if you get feedback from them, you might change it, revise it, but it is not assigned any impact factor. But interestingly, what is his name? The mathematician from St. Petersburg, he got a Fields Medal by publishing a paper, just depositing a paper in such a repository. In the
Gregory
yes.
Perelman. Yeah.
So it is possible for a scientist to become of that repute simply by depositing an article to that, because people will read it free. Now, if in future we can promote this model in such a way that this becomes the dominant model, then possibly we can phase out this excessive obscene obsession with impact factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. So, okay. So the next question comes, like, of course, all these things we do and we are saying can be done maybe in future, but while if we look at the immediate situation, what should we think of the Sci-Hub and LibGen in particular, whether they should be allowed to operate or not? That's the question actually comes from the student. So this question goes to Professor Balaram.
I think that is very clear. The Sci-Hub LibGen problem is an immediate problem. I think one should work, one can only work now that there's a court case against trying to make sure that this case doesn't eventually lead to blocking. It's not very easy to block these internet sites. They will crop up again somewhere else, and service providers will not be able to do this very well. But there is a recent development. A forum of scientists in Delhi has taken up this, and they have asked to be impleaded in this court case. So the judge has permitted them to be impleaded as parties to this case. And now there is a more high-profile lawyer also, Gopal Shankar Narayan. And the result of this is the judge has put the next hearing on February 23rd. And now once you have good lawyers, you might have the next hearing in 2022, and slowly this problem will disappear into the... But I think the noise which is being made by everybody will make a rethink in the among the publishers. That is not to pursue such cases. But Sci-Hub and LibGen are not the long-term alternative. Like, for example, I don't know how many people are listening, but does anybody know how Sci-Hub runs? Sci-Hub is run, at least publicly, by a single individual, Alexandra El-Bakyan, who pays for her, who allows all this to be maintained. Nobody knows. Where is it from? Kazakhstan, apparently, but still nobody knows. So tomorrow it might just as well disappear. Sci-Hub has no obligation to you and me.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Balaram. So the next question comes from Mr. Lakshman Rao. He says that, can we promote resource sharing among the institutions, institution as a part solution in providing access, while the public funded institutions allowed others to use the library resources? Okay, so what he wanted to say is that, can the national institutions share their resources to give this knowledge a free access to the people, and in particularly the ones which are publicly funded, particularly the libraries and so. So Professor Soumitro Banerjee, can you say a bit on this?
I definitely the money that is spent on the libraries is public money, and so it should in principle be spent in public interest, and that can be done, but the mechanism of doing so will be difficult, because presently, suppose I am in IISER Kolkata. When IISER Kolkata subscribes to a journal, the publisher identifies that particular URL as something that's subscribed to the journal, and anything else, anybody comes in from somewhere else within India, they will not get access. So how to make it happen, I do not know. That's a different business, but yes, theoretically, ethically, that can be done.
So maybe I will answer this question because I've dealt with this.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the Indian Institute of Science under the MHRD consortia has access to a lot of journals. But when you sign these agreements, you sign for an IP-enabled access.
Yes.
And I think there are reasonable use clauses in that. So occasionally what would happen is that people will come from outside, and while they are visiting the institution, download, let's say, an entire issue of a journal. The moment this happens, the access is cut off. So you have, in these publishing deals, these agreements, subscriptions, clauses are built in. This is why the one nation, one subscription is being thought of. Otherwise, each institute, because the cost of the subscription will be determined by the number of potential users. If you now say access should be free to everybody, the publishers will give you a price that all the more than 1.2 billion people in India will be reading those journals and ask you for a price. This will have to be negotiated even. It's not that the national institutions are denying anybody access.
Okay.
Because it's just online access. But you need IP-enabled access.
Okay, okay. So now I go to the next question. Thank you, Professor Balaram. So now I go to the next question. It's coming from Aradhita Chattopadhyay. She says that, can we add a review process in archive itself where the article will remain published, readable, and the feature can be added that some reviewers made comments viewable? So can scientific community even think of this model, that you introduce a review process on the archive papers, manuscripts? So this question goes to Professor Lakhotia. Do you think, is it feasible?
Well, you see, actually the archive system is post-publication review system, that all archives allow that. Just as in social media, you can make your post, there are options that people who read it can put their comments on it. But that's not a typical review process in the sense. In fact, many journals are now thinking of this kind of post-publication review process, that they can do it. But in this particular case, review is possible. For example, many times when I read a preprint on an archive, I immediately communicate with the scientists my views. I may not put it in the web there, but I communicate with them, and they do improve or not, or they explain or something. So that review is possible. But you see, once you start reviewing, then you start the whole ball game all over again. So that then the purpose of preprint archives is lost. So preprint archive is simply that, all right, what you have published, made it available. See, this is the great one advantage, one important advantage is the idea plagiarism. That cannot happen because Once you submit a manuscript for regular publication, even if it is very fast, it takes few months. And during those few months, some people have access to your ideas, the reviewer, the editor, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it may so happen that your journal, your article gets rejected or delayed, and someone else publishes it. That's what we call the idea plagiarism. This is not very uncommon. But in preprint archive, there's no idea plagiarism. You submit it today, tomorrow morning, if everything else, if there's no case of misfit or misconduct, it's available on net in a day or two. And therefore, you can always claim that this was my idea, that I had proposed something here. So that's the advantage. And I think we need to inculcate this culture of preprint archives much more than what we are doing right now.
Thank you, Professor Lakhotia. Professor Banerjee, you have something to add on this?
Slight bit. Firstly, before the Wikipedia came into being, nobody thought that such an idea might succeed, because it has a possibility of anybody putting in wrong information. But still, you see, on a large scale, people are generally good, and people do provide reliable information. Though there are exceptions, but still, the concept actually has worked. In the same sense, if we allow the archive model that Professor Lakhotia was speaking about, that to become the predominant model, then the readers, presently the associate editor will assign reviewers, will get agreement from them, and then they will review. If that is stopped, instead, after publication, post publication, whoever reads it may send a review to the author, or maybe even post it there, which will not be visible to the public, but the author can see it. As a result, the author can has a possibility of incrementally improving the manuscript, finally, which will become very useful. And the value of a manuscript is really in the content, not in any metric, any number. So this, if it is useful, people will read it. Therefore, I'll strongly suggest that the academies may take up the plan of publishing in every field such archival journals, which means that it's not journal, it's just a repository, where science will be free and open access. Nobody will make money out of it. I think this process can succeed.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Actually, on this line, possibly go another question I have from Mr. Vasant N. He says that, dear sir, is it right to call Alexandra Albakian a thief? Since you mentioned knowledge to be free, and so can you please elaborate a bit, Professor Banerjee, on that?
Oh, me? Oh,
yes.
No, I would not call her a thief. Rather, it is the other way around. The people who are stealing our intellectual property to make money out of it, they are the thieves. So basically, as Professor Balaram has mentioned in one of his interviews with a newspaper, I read in the newspaper, he was referring to the act of Alexandra Elbakian as something like a Robin Hood of science, where Robin Hood was stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Here, she is actually stealing from the rich and giving to those who need it. So in that sense, I will not call it it's not unethical, it's not stealing, but yes, it might be seen as illegal. And that is why I was referring that we have to make a distinction between what is legal and what is ethical.
Okay, Professor Banerjee, we have time for a couple of more questions. So this question now goes to Professor Balaram. He says that, so Miss JNS, she asked this question, that it is very true, but to make people publish in our own journal, what can be done? Can the grant agencies bring in a rule that it must be published only in our own Indian journal? Then they will look at the proposal. Can such rule be made from the funding
Yeah,
agencies?
I think mandating anything is generally a bad idea because eventually mandates are misused. I think you have to remember that science today is a global enterprise. And you want scientists everywhere who are in the same field to read one another's work. And this is why the publishers have become important. I don't think you're going to ever reach a system
Voice is
where,
breaking.
suppose for instance, you had
Yeah, we are losing your voice, Professor Balaram.
Voice is gone.
Yes, we cannot hear Professor Balaram. So, Professor Balaram, can you hear us?
He will not be able to answer.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, can I continue in between on this
Yes.
question? That again, you see, the point is that we cannot mandate 100%. You see, that's like only travel by Air India. That cannot work. But what I would suggest, and that's what the Academy has also suggested in their recommendation, that of the public funded projects, a certain proportion, maybe 20% or 25% publication should go to good peer-reviewed journals published in India. That kind of suggestion can work. But you can't say that everything that's funded by Indian government money or public money has to go to Indian journals. No, that will not work. But a certain proportion can be mandated and that can maintain. But then at the same time, the journal will also be brought up to date. You just can't say, okay, because then the predatory journals will stand to benefit. We need to bring in good journals and good practices. Maybe Professor Balaram is now back in audibility mode. Can continue.
I don't know, I might be a little bit cynical about the whole area, but I don't think that any dramatic change in the publishing model is going to happen in timescales that we are thinking about. Because you can look at the science publishing industry in 1900 and look at the science publishing industry in 2020, and you can see how it's grown, the direction in which it has gone. Would, for example, if you agree to only mandates for India manufactured cell phones or India manufactured computers? Wouldn't.
No.
So I think it's unrealistic. See, we have to be realistic. There are two things in which we should do. One is to make sure that everybody still has access to Sci-Hub and that the Delhi High Court doesn't pass some kind of order which tomorrow limits access. That's one. And in India, we are quite practical about that, how to get court injunctions stopped or court injunctions applied. That's one. But the way I see this convention is that if Sci-Hub access and LibGen access were freely available, everybody would go back to business as usual.
Okay.
And that would be not what I think the purpose of this convention would be. It could look at a slightly longer range model. I did get a question which maybe is not there on the chat box, but I think
Yes.
maybe one should discuss. Question which was sent to me by Professor Banerjee. Should the copyright or intellectual property laws be changed so that these favor the development of science and society? Very important question. We need to look at copyright and intellectual property laws as applied to science, especially copyright in this context. This has been done earlier when India went in the pharmaceutical regime after having signed the WTO agreements. And see, now generics are still available, cheap, everything in India. Prices have not gone impossibly high. Stents, for example, have been regulated. So here there is an important thing, but I think this requires a great deal of study by people with a legal background and understanding of present copyright laws. So many of the questions that are asked, we are not violating copyright. That is, we are not really strictly doing anything illegal. This question of whether we are doing something ethical or not, we should not worry too much, because everybody has their own definition of ethics. But this is a matter for Parliament. It's a matter for law framing. So I don't think we have the knowledge to look at this. Copyright as applied to scientific papers is different from copyright as applied to a work of fiction. In a work of fiction, the author derives his living by selling the books and getting royalty on the books. Scientists, on the other hand, this question does not apply. Their work is publicly funded. Copyright law is sort of uniform. Today, for example, if you must follow this case, because when the arguments are made, you will find that the copyright law which applies to videos might be applied also to your.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Balaram, for highlighting this fact. So now we have one question, the time, whatever we have, we can take one question. And that actually goes to Professor Soumitro Banerjee. Says that what the scientists and young researcher, or as a whole the scientific community, should do to counter the privatization of knowledge. Yeah, Professor Soumitro Banerjee.
There are two aspects of it. Firstly, if the young researcher who is getting into scientific pursuit today views science as a career and scientific research as a sort of means of furthering a career, then this model cannot be changed. Our mindset, if we look at science as our passion, we want to know the secrets of this material world, and so we conduct our hypothesis, we conduct our experiments, so it is our own passion, our own. I mean, a scientist cannot live without asking questions and seeking answers to the question. It's just a mindset. On the other hand, the careeristic mindset is that I am doing science in order to achieve that careeristic goal. Now, if actually this whole publication model that is now blocking the advancement of science has grown out of the scientists, it has built that mindset among scientists and it has survived on that mindset, is that science is a career. And that is what has led to this, as I was saying, the obsession about numbers, the impact factors, publishing without really substance in it. The moment it is published, you get a number. So this is happening because people see it as a career. So long as this is there, the journals will have not only occasion, but reasons to survive in the same model. So my advice to this younger generation would be, don't see science as a career. See science as a passion. Science as a means to serve the society. And if you do that, if you look at science that way and do science that way, practice science that way, then your medium of publication will be tuned according to that. You simply want to let your work known to the others without caring about what happens to your career. If that happens, then if that happens on a large scale, if we can propagate this idea among the scientific community that science is not a career, then suddenly we'll find, if we really succeed in doing that, then suddenly you will find that these commercial companies that prey on our greed or our obsession with being given importance, all these put together, they suddenly will find that these bases are not there. the basis on which they make the money is our vulnerability. Without publishing in high quality journals, I'll not get the promotion. Without publishing 4 papers a year, I'll not get the promotion. So it is all promotion linked. If we remove that, suddenly you will find even the normal journals that. Okay. So the other we can publish in the journal that actually serves our purpose. And I was sort of saying that for that purpose, even archival journals suffice. So my advice to them would be to change the mindset. Otherwise, the ground on which this publication model is built will also perpetuate. That is my main message to the younger generation of scientists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee. So with this, we are going to close the question and answer session. So once again, I would like to thank Professor Balaram, Professor S.C. Lakhotia, and Banerjee for this question and answer session, and all those who post the question both on Zoom chat box and also on YouTube chat box. So with this, now I will hand over the program to Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukhopadhyay, the president of this convention. Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukhopadhyay, over to you, sir.
We have come to nearly the end of the program. The basic question that we discussed in this convention is that how we can assure that the scientific workers in our country have free access to knowledge. One point everybody agreed that the present model of publication and the subscription and the monopoly on the publications, that is hindering the free access to knowledge to the young scientists. And several alternative models have also been suggested. One is, of course, the Sci-Hub and LabJet, what they are doing. And Professor Balaram has aptly said that as long as this present system of publication and this predatory publication exist, the Sci-Hub and LabJet phenomenon would also exist. Maybe Sci-Hub itself may disappear, but another website in place of Sci-Hub will certainly appear then. The other alternative models that have been suggested is about the archival model. It has also been suggested that we look at the Copyright Act and have legal advice, so that how the Copyright Act is to be applied to scientific publications, and the downloading an article by an organization like the Sci-Hub is not a violation of the Copyright Act. These aspects should also be considered. And finally, there is one point which arises in my mind, that the suggestion to have the archival journals and to have a lot of Indian journals, so that we don't go through this process of Copyright Acts and all these things. So this has to be done not by itself alone. Along with this, we must have, if we ask our young scientists to put their important paper in an archive, then at the same time, we must also ask people like us, the senior people who are sitting on committees to employment, committees to appointment, committees to fellowship to academies, committees for awards, we also give importance to archival material. So it has to be total movement in overhauling our peer reviewing processes, how we review the worth of a scientist, and also the publication model. All these things together must go into a overall science movement so that this can be changed. We cannot simply ask the young scientists that you don't think about your career, you submit your paper in an archive. It also is then binding on us, the senior people, not to place so much importance on citation index when we sit on the selection committees and speak our mind freely on this point and don't succumb to the pressure by the others. So this is my closing remarks on this thing. So let this convention be the beginning of a movement to how we can make the scientific knowledge freely accessible to the scientific workers of this country, and we can explore different models and then arrive at a suitable solution. Now we have formally placed, the formal resolution has been placed. Normally in a convention, not an online one, there should be a voting at the end of this thing, but with so many participants, it is not possible to have that voting now. So I will simply ask that if there is anyone opposing the resolution, to put their opinion or say no to the resolution in the chat box. So if I can look at the, or Manavendra can look at the chat box and see how many opposition has come, how many have opposed the resolution. And then on that basis, we can arrive at a decision.
Yes.
Instead of asking 5,000 people that yes or no. So Manavendra.
Yes, yes, Professor Mukherjee. So far, I don't see any no, both on Zoom chat box as well as on YouTube.
So I don't think, it seems that most of the participants at this convention in the main agree with the resolution and with the necessity of the main fundamental principle for which this convention was held, that the science should be free and that the science hub and LibGen should be allowed to freely operate in India. That has the unanimous approval of the participants of this convention. With this, we come to the final stage of the convention, and I request Dr. Venkatesan, a senior executive member of the Breakthrough Science Society, to propose a vote of thanks. Dr. Venkatesan, please propose the vote of thanks, and then we'll end.
Dr. Venkatesan, we cannot hear your voice.
Need to unmute.
He muted?
No, his mic seemed to be working, but the voice we cannot hear.
Okay, in that case, just keep that step.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since Dr. Venkatesan can propose a formal vote of thanks, then on behalf of the Breakthrough Science Society, I thank the speakers who have addressed this convention. I thank all the participants, and I also thank the people of Breakthrough who are looked after the technical aspects of holding this convention. Thanks to all of you. Thank you. So this convention is closed now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.